Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillahi wa kafa, wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa, amma ba'd. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri, wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa barik wa sallim. Just a few words about zakat because it's a topical subject at this time of the year, and we have been receiving some questions on this topic. First of all, let us remember that zakat is one of the pillars of Islam, and as such it has huge significance. Zakat and sadaqah and charity are a very important aspect of Islam. And our acts of worship are divided into two types: those which are with the body, such as salah and saum, and those which are with our wealth, such as zakah and qurbani. And hajj is a combination of both. We spend money and we use our bodies. There are huge promises if we give our zakat, promises of reward and barakah in the dunya and akhirah. And there are severe warnings if we do not. If a person gives their zakat, it's a purification for their wealth and for themselves. And zakat and sadaqah never decreases property, it increases it. In fact, one of the meanings of zakat is purification, and another is increase. The word zakat also means an increase in something. So that's what zakat does. It increases your wealth. It may appear contrary to logic, but this is a challenge of what we physically see in this dunya. This is where we put our trust into the revelation, the word of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah says, "Yamhaqullahu riba wa yurbis sadaqat." Allah Ta'ala erases, annihilates riba, usury. There's no barakah in it. The apparent increase is not a real increase. It will flop in the end. And it will be a responsibility on the one who gives it and takes it, an answerability. And on the other hand, وَيُرْبِ الصَّدَقَاتِ, the sadaqat, Allah Ta'ala increases them. So one of the benefits of zakat is that it purifies our wealth and it purifies us. خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ بِهَا وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ. It's a purification. And it's a preservation for that wealth and property. And it's an increase. And there's the huge reward in the hereafter. What is given in the dunya is returned to us many times over in the akhirah. It's like a seed, as Allah mentions in Surah Baqarah, كَمَثَلِ حَبَّةٍ أَنْبَتَتْ سَبْعَ سَنَابِلَ, which results in 7 stalks and shoots coming up from the ground. فِي كُلِّ سُنْبُلَةٍ مِئَةُ حَبَّةٍ. Each has 100 seeds in it. 100 seeds as a constant. So you have 700 in return for one. وَاللَّهُ يُضَاعِفُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah can multiply and increase for whomever He wills beyond this as well. So the permanent reward in the hereafter, it's nur on the day of Qiyamah, it's a protection from the adhab of the qabr and the adhab of Jahannam, and it's a protection from punishment, sadaqah and zakah in the dunya, from problems in the dunya, from calamities. So there are huge benefits, and I can't do justice in a few moments. Shaykh Zakaria rahimullah has written one of his finest works. Subhanallah, our Shaykh would say that if there's one year that I cried a lot in my life, it was the year that I went through fadail of sadaqat, the virtues of sadaqat. So it's something which a person should dip into. It's full of knowledge, it's an ocean, and it has so many advices, so many anecdotes, and so many virtues. On the other hand, if a person, and it's a thick volume, all full of tafsir, hadith, and some history as well of biographical accounts. On the other hand, if a person doesn't give their zakat, then this wealth becomes a liability for them, and they are punished with it. And in the hereafter, as the Quran mentions, يَوْمَ تُكْوَى بِهِمْ, their foreheads and their backs will be branded with the heated gold and silver and property of this dunya, which they refuse to give. And it will, as we learn from the hadith, it will appear as punishment in the form of a huge serpent which will be poisonous, and it will bite this person, and it will say to him, Ana kanzuk, I am your stored up and hoarded up wealth. So zakat is incredibly important, and it's good to see that in Ramadan in particular, many people's hearts are turned towards this and the desire to give extra in charity, and they make an effort to do so. And so it's necessary to know the ahkam relating to this. So in brief, a couple of points. When you come into the possession of a nisab, which is a fixed amount of wealth, which we shall talk about, and 1 year passes, 1 year in the Islamic calendar, 12 months on, and you are still at the threshold or above, then any decrease or increase during the year will not be taken account of. And 1 year from the time you initially came into possession of a nisab, you will give 1/40th if it's gold, silver or money, or if it's assets in the form of goods which you sell, you'll give 1/40th of their value in zakat. And there is a separate way of calculating the zakat of crops, the ushar and the nisf ushar, irrigated crops, naturally irrigated crops and manually irrigated crops. And then you have livestock and animals. And of course, most of that doesn't affect most of the people who will be listening to this right now, so we don't go into that. So for the most part, it's going to be a case of people having savings in the form of money and gold and silver and business assets. So this is what we can be looking at, inshallah. So the nisab for gold and silver, for gold, if you are calculating in tolas, it's 7.5 tolas, and this is 87.48 grams of gold. And if it's silver, it's 52.5 tolas, and this is 612.36 tolas grams. That's 612.36 grams. Now, what happens is, of course, in these days, the price of gold and silver fluctuates, and 7.5 dollars approaches £4,000. It's above 3,800, and the silver is just over £200. 238 pounds approximately. So basically, it fluctuates. So what happens is the two balance each other. Now today we see a huge difference, and in our lifetimes we've normally seen silver to be far cheaper than gold. It's not always the case. So whichever is cheaper is the one that we go with. So we will calculate based on the silver. Now what happens is, if you have gold and silver, the two merge together and the total value is worked out, and if it's in excess of the nisab of silver, then you calculate from that and you give your 40th, which is 2.5%. The 2.5% comes from the 40th, 2.5%. And if you have savings in terms of money, then all of it's merged together and the total value. If you also have some goods, such as the stock in a business, the physical stock which you sell in your business, then that's also, it's Mufti Taqi Sahab and others say it's wholesale value actually. So you can choose to give the retail value because that's the price you'll be selling it at, but you can give the zakat based on the wholesale value. So that's just a very quick overview of some aspects. Now the important thing is here, if it's fard on you to perform salah, if you've entered the age of puberty, early adolescence, and it's fard on you to fast, then it's also fard on you to give zakat. This means that if you're in possession of an excess of just over £200, then you should be looking at your circumstances. Sometimes it's assumed this is something which the grown-ups do. Well, you are in the Sharia's eyes a grown-up if you've entered into the age of puberty. So we'll start looking at some of your questions, and inshallah we'll see what we can answer from them, inshallah.
Just to follow on from that, Manasab, first few questions are, I have under 7 tola of gold. Do I pay zakat on it?
I have under 7 tola of gold. Do I pay zakat on it? Yes, you do, because if it's just under 7 tola, it's in excess of the amount in value of the silver nisab, and that's what we go by because it's the low one. See, let me explain this point a little further. Anfa' lil fuqara, whatever is more beneficial for the poor people. Meaning, if silver is cheaper, as it is the quantity of silver is far greater than the quantity of gold in weight, as you've seen. But if the nisab of silver works out cheaper, then that will be the one with which you work out the gold as well. So the value of your gold is in far excess. It's where, if it's just under $7, it'll be a few £1,000s, and so you would calculate that and give zakat from there. Ji.
Similar question, I think this is one. If I have less than 87 grams of gold, do I pay zakat on it?
Less than 87 grams, you do. If its value is if you have less than 87 grams of gold, because its value is in excess of the silver nisab, and of course you'll merge it, won't you? You'll merge it together with any money that you have as well. So if you have gold, most people don't really keep a lot of silver these days, but if you have gold and some money, the total of it, and if it's in excess of the 238.82, and that's by that recent reference, so it can change on a daily basis. It's a bit difficult for people to find out under lockdown because the jewelers' shops are all closed, and that's what you would normally do. You'd pick up the phone to a jeweler's shop, a Muslim jeweler, and jewelers normally don't know the rate. Something you need to follow up constantly. So the point is that your assets are in excess of that, so you would give zakat. Ji.
What are the fard of zakat?
What are the fard of zakat? The question isn't clear. If the person would like to rephrase the question, by the way, as we're speaking about questions, if you wish to, you can also send questions through email, and we'll also receive those if you don't want to send questions through our sort of Facebook page. Or so basically, the fard of zakat is that you give 2.5% of the value of your assets once a year. In simple terms, this is in excess of your hawaij asliya, your original needs, which are the cost of living essentially. So you deduct that, and anything surplus, which is counted as your savings, it's not relevant what you would intend to do with it in the future. That's not relevant. If you have it in the moment in excess of your living costs, then you would give 2.5% of that to people who are deserving of your zakat. Ji.
Where can you give zakat?
Good question. Where can you give zakat? Because we've not touched on that today yet. So there are a number of categories. You can give it to a person who has nothing, a very poor person. You can give it to a person who has something but is still poor and does not possess a nisab. And I'll come back to this point if there's an opportunity in a moment. There's an extra reward in giving your zakat. These are the two categories which would normally apply these days. There's an extra reward in giving zakat to people who are more needy there, which is often the case now. But although, to be honest, in the United Kingdom now, there are more and more people who are eligible for zakat, and we ought to look out for them. Then we can also, it's important to mention here that you don't give zakat. You can give zakat to relatives. You can go sideways on the family tree. You can give it to your brothers and sisters, nephews, nieces, uncles, aunties. You don't go up and down, meaning you don't give zakat to your own parents and grandparents, or your own children and grandchildren, or your own spouses, because they're already included in your responsibility. If your parents are needy, you should be spending on them anyway. And your children are your dependents anyway. So those are exceptions. You don't spend on them. But you can give zakat to brothers and sisters, nephews and nieces, uncles and aunties, and there's a double reward in doing that, because they're relatives too. Ji.
Oh, you were saying they feel embarrassed asking somebody whether they're eligible or not, and what is the cut-off point, whether you're eligible for zakat or not. So how do you ascertain?
So if it's embarrassing to ask, of course, and you don't ask, you're meant to use your better judgment. Now, the cut-off point is, there are three categories of people. Now, I request that if you're listening to this, listen to this bit carefully, because the purpose is clarity, not confusion. So if it's not understood, then we can repeat the question if you say you've not understood the point, or you can listen to it again. There are three categories of people. There are those people who are wealthy, such that they would have to give zakat. Nice and simple, one side. On the other side, there are those people who are very poor or relatively poor, and they can receive zakat. There's a category in the middle who don't have to give it, but can't receive it either. And this is people who have possessions in excess of their needs, which they could sell and raise a nisab. When we say in excess of their needs, we're talking not about the clothes they wear, or the car that they drive, or the furniture in their house, or their household goods, their kitchenware. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about a person, for example, who has, for example, a garage full of something which he could easily sell and it's not in use, and raise the value of one nisab, this couple of £100. And this could be an old I don't know, it could be an old bicycle and some sports equipment which is never used. So this person isn't really poor in that sense, to the degree that, so if a person has something stocked up, but this is for that person to understand as well. The person should understand this, because it might not be possible for other people to ascertain this. But this does not mean that a person who has a roof over their head, or even or that they are in possession of their own house and a car, and even perhaps they have a job, and all the normal household things, it doesn't mean they can't receive zakat, because they may have nothing extra. And these things do not count for what I'm saying. I'm talking about surplus, which is stocked up on the side. The stuff that people put away in their loft, like the old mobile phone and the old computer, which is not being used, those types of things. Okay, so this is a middle category. And this is, again, I reiterate, is people who have stuff in today's world, stuff which they've gathered up and they're not using, and they could sell it to the equivalent of a nisab. They shouldn't take zakat. But people who are not in this circumstance, they can take zakat even if they have a house and they have a job. Now, how do you ascertain? It's your better judgment, I've just said. And you're not expected to interrogate them or embarrass them. You don't even have to tell them it's zakat. So if your heart is satisfied that they are legible, then you can give it to them. And then if it turns out afterwards that they were not legible, then it's still okay and your zakat's been fulfilled. You've actually paid your due. Ji.
Moving on from zakat, then in Hanafi fiqh, if I only know 10 surahs from Surah of Al-Fil to Surah Al-Nas, am I able to pray those 10 surahs in every single namaz without changing and praying?
In Hanafi fiqh, if I only know 10 surahs from Al-Fil to Al-Nas, can I keep repeating them without changing in every single namaz? Yes, and not just in Hanafi fiqh, in any fiqh. You can recite from anywhere in the Quran. And you should do that. And you can recite, even in the Tarawih prayer, for example, you can recite 10 surahs from Fil to An-Nas. You recite all 10, one in each rakat, and then you can recite them all over again. So you can choose. You can recite some of them, you can recite all of them in one rakat, but you should recite them in order. And you shouldn't jump in these short surahs from one to the other unless you're going to miss at least a couple at the same time. And you should read them in pairs, or you should make a bigger jump, because they're connected together, the meanings are connected together. So it's recommended to do that, and you shouldn't recite them backwards. But by all means, recite from where you will and recite them all again and again. And absolutely you should, and that's what they're for. Ji.
Can I pray small surahs from different parts of ayahs? So basically, can I pray ayahs from different surahs and different rakats? So
can I pray ayahs from different surahs and different rakats? You can divide up a surah, and as long as you recite a substantial section, you wouldn't sort of read one ayat from one surah and another from another surah. If this is a general question about the whole Quran, you can recite just one long surah in one rakat. You can read Ayatul Kursi, for example, in one rakat, and that's your rakat done. So if it's longer than 3 short verses, like Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwal abtar, there are many surah ayats in the Quran which are longer than this. So you can recite any one such long surah. And so you certainly can divide, and this is established in the Sunnah. You can recite one surah in one rakah, or you can divide a surah up, and you can recite part of it in one rakah and part of it in another, as long as you're reciting at least 3 short ayats, or a long ayat which is equivalent to those or longer. Ji.
Just to follow on from that, so if you read Surah Al-Kafirun, first 3 ayahs in the first rakat, in the second rakat you read the last 3 ayahs of Surah Nas, that's okay?
If you wanted to divide Surah Kafirun into 2 rakats, technically that's valid.
Next question, can you read the Quran on your phone without wudu?
Can you read the Quran on your phone without wudu? Yes, but the recommendation is, and this isn't the universal opinion, and I'm conscious of that, but the recommendation is that you do maintain the adab and don't touch the screen. Now, there's a big discussion here, the screen and the image on the screen. It's about the adab, it's all symbolic. It's about the adab. It's appropriate not to touch the screen if there is Quran on the screen, and this is the recommendation at least by many ulama. But you can read from the screen if you don't have wudu. You can hold the phone. Ji.
Just going back to zakat questions
Yeah.
again. I have savings in my business account and in my personal account. Is zakat calculated for the full amount in both accounts or just the personal account?
I have savings in my business account and in my personal account. Is zakat on both or just on my personal account? It's certainly on your personal account, but on your business account, it depends on the circumstances. See, it's you're the sole sort of owner of the business, then yes, after your dues, if you have any bills to pay, if you have any payments to make which you owe, and if you're a partner, then it's on behalf of everybody in the same way after deducting the obligations. G. And by the way, there's plenty of websites on which you can get maybe you can pin one up as well. Yeah, you can download a chart which gives you like a balance sheet where every type of asset is mentioned in a separate section, and you just fill in each one, and then you just sort of take the balance at the end, and it mentions all the different categories. G. They're easily available. G.
If one is reading the Quran and someone mentions the Prophet's name, should
when do you not read Salat and Salam on the Prophet ﷺ when you hear his name? One is when you're hearing the adhan. You actually wait till the end. See, the hadith, if you take the clear instruction of the hadith, we're supposed to repeat the words of the mu'adhin. When he says Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, we say the same. When he says Hayya ala salah and Hayya ala al-falah, we say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And then when the adhan is finished, some hadith narrations clearly mention that we should then send salat and salam, salat on the Prophet ﷺ. We should read the Rushif after the adhan first, and then read the dua. Allahumma rabba hadhihi da'wati tamma wa salat al-qa'imah. So not during the adhan. Then if it's Jummah and the mu'adhin, the imam is on the mimbar, then you remain silent. You don't respond. And another occasion when you don't read salat and salam is when you're reciting the Quran, and when you're reading salat as well, and you're listening to the imam recite the Quran. You don't recite salat and salam in the middle of your tilawah. It's not necessary at that time. Beyond that, even in a majlis, the first time you hear Rasulullah's name, many ulama say it's wajib, and the general opinion is that thereafter too, it's very important and there's a great emphasis. But you don't necessarily have to recite, say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam every time, although it's very, very appropriate that we do. We move our lips on those occasions and we say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam without fail, but not during tilawat. Ji.
When you are in the same room as someone reading the Quran and they come to a sajda, does everyone in that room need to take part in the sajda?
If someone's reciting the ayat of sajda and you're in the same room and you hear them, yes, you do. Everybody who hears that does need to do that. Everybody who listens to the recitation of sajda needs to do sajda, and everyone who recites it needs to. The exception is if the imam is reciting and you're not in the salah, you're approaching, and you've not managed to join the imam in time, then there's no sajda on you. So you don't do sajda outside of the salah for a salah in which someone is reciting the ayah.
So this is somebody saying they're just sitting there in a room reading the Quran, not actually reading salah. So somebody's reading the Quran at home and reading it loud, and then they're coming to a sajda themselves personally. Then they're putting the Quran down and getting up, doing a sajda. Does the people in that room go and join them in that sajda? That's the separate.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so somebody's reading the Quran at home.
Mm-hmm. Someone's reciting Quran at home.
Yeah, and they come to a sajda.
They come to an ayat of sajda.
Yeah, so then they close the Quran.
They close the Quran, do sajda, yeah.
The people in that room who are listening to the Quran being read, do they have to join them with that sajda?
Yeah, they don't have to join them in the same sajda. Yeah. The rest of the people, they can do their own. Although, you can do sajda as a congregation. If everyone has wudu in a majlis and the ayat of sajda is recited, and you don't have to make safs. The method of doing this is everybody faces the qibla and just one person says Allahu Akbar and goes down and everybody does it together. That is actually a correct way of doing it. But the other way of doing it is individually, and that's fine too. Ji.
As we may still be in lockdown when Eid takes place, what is the ruling on reading Eid namaz at home?
Okay, as we're still on lockdown, how do you celebrate Eid namaz? We'll come to that. Let us let the time come. I promise you, inshallah, that we'll address this separately close to Eid. Right now, let us focus on Laylatul Qadr. Let us earn the Eid. So we'll come back to this, inshallah. Ji.
What is considered a haram relationship? Is it permitted to have a boyfriend or girlfriend?
What is considered a haram relationship? Is it permissible to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Yes, you can have a boyfriend if he's your husband, and you can have a girlfriend if she's your wife. So basically, okay, let me sort of dwell on this point in a little bit of detail. Islam is a religion of moderation, and Islam is a religion of balance, and Islam responds to our natural needs, our nature, in everything. So on the one hand, this applies to everything. On the one hand, we're not told to be, there's a whole spectrum of diet, isn't there, in the world today, and people have their own reasons. They don't have to be ethical or religious reasons. People have their own reasons, health reasons, whatever. But you have the vegans, and you have the vegetarians, and then you have people who eat meat, and then within the people who eat meat, you have people who eat all variety of meat, the types of meats which most societies don't eat. Some people will eat the meat of certain animals which normally are not consumed and considered to be food. Okay, some people eat insects as well. The list goes on. And then the other extreme, which is of course abhorrent to talk about, and it's not legal in any religion, or people who eat human meat. It's a whole spectrum from one end to the other. What does Islam say? What does the Quran say? Tayyibat. The Quran says that you can eat meat of a particular variety. There's certain types of animal meats that you can eat as long as this animal has been sacrificed in a proper way. So we are given a middle path. So neither are we told that we can't eat meat, nor are we told we can eat any meat. Similarly, if we take another example, clothing. You have some lifestyles in which people have minimal clothing, or their belief system is that clothing isn't necessary, and the other another dimension is people who will dress in very, very simple and basic clothing because this will be considered to be virtuous. In Islam, we have, in the Sunnah, we have the whole variety. The Prophet ﷺ wore simple clothing. On occasion, the Prophet ﷺ wore very expensive clothing as well, with far more than any of you will possess. Your most expensive suit will not equate the thousands that this one set of garments that the Prophet wore on this occasion was worth. So we have a spectrum. You can wear expensive clothing, cheaper clothing, which doesn't have as much monetary value, but there are guidelines in terms of how much it should cover and what's permissible and what's ideal. So in all aspects of life, what is, so within this context, within marriage, one end of the spectrum is to be celibate and to have no sexual relationships whatsoever. Islam doesn't teach that, and it doesn't promote that. And the other extreme is all manner of sexual relationships, to the extent that, in today's world, the amount of legislation which we have to protect children, to safeguard children, is a consequence of what some people's minds are capable of. So there's another extreme, all sorts of relationships. To be clear, in Islam, sexual relationships are not for a fling. Musafi, the Quran talks about this, just for a casual relationship. That concept doesn't exist in Islam for sexual relationships. Sexual relationships, there's a very clear definition. The relationships in Islam are between males and females, and within a specific context. So there are certain couples who cannot marry because of being closely related to each other, and there's a list of these. The obvious ones are parents and siblings, for example. And so there's a whole list. حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ. If you read the final verses of the fourth juz, the fourth juz, and in Surah An-Nisa, you'll find a list there. So there's a whole list who you can't marry. And then the ones you do marry, the word in the Quran, first page of the fifth juz, right? Muhsinin and muhsanat. What is ihsan? Think of this. The word hisan in Arabic is used for a fort. And the muhsin and the muhsina are the ones who have entered into this fort of ihsan. This is with the sad, not the sin. Ihsan. The ihsan is relating to spirituality. Ihsan, you're in this spiritual fort of protection. So, and the purpose of this is غَيْرَ مُسَافِحَات, غَيْرَ مُسَافِحِينَ. The Quran says, and it wouldn't be incorrect to translate it as not for a fling, not for a casual relationship. In ordinary day-to-day language, this is how I would say. But Islam doesn't want that for us. Islam says, go into a relationship with responsibility so that we do not end up with the single parent who is left alone with the child, be it the father, be it the mother, and these court cases and these tugs of wars which we see, and this neglect and this lack of role models for children in the form of one parent or the other. Islam doesn't want that. Islam wants a stable family relationship, and Islam wants children. Islam recommends that we have children, and the Prophet ﷺ encourages this. And this is the dua of the Anbiya. It was their desire, because you can't make a better contribution to society than a pious child. You leave the dunya when your time comes. If you leave behind a pious child, you've made a huge contribution. Look at the society today under lockdown. The champions and heroes of today's society, who are they? Human beings. So if you can be the means of a human being coming into this dunya, and you bring them up and they become tomorrow's hero, the hero of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, making a contribution to humanity, that's something which is sadaqah jariyah for you. And this is one of the objectives. So the point is, in Islam, relationships are not for their own sake. Sexual pleasure in Islam is not for its own sake. It's permitted in the context of marriage so that you can keep each other halal. And what we mean by this is that couples are meant to support each other so that they don't end up in sin. So each is meant to be sensitive to the other's sexual needs within a halal context. And everything is not halal in a bedroom, even between a husband and wife. There is a halal and haram, and Islam is a religion of purity. So there is a context here, and this is an education which people need to achieve and acquire before they go into marriage. And it's not something which is appropriate to talk about on this forum. And the second, so one purpose of marriage is keeping each other pure and chastity, chaste. The second one is to fulfill the sunnah of the Anbiya alayhimu salatu wasalam. It's ibadah, marriage is ibadah. And a third objective is progeny. So the idea of a relationship, the fact that you desire a soulmate, Islam is saying yes, sooner rather than later, as soon as you become baligh. You know, Shah Waliullah rahmatullah alayhi, this huge muhaddith and great scholar and mufassir, his father married him at the age of 15. And we have other examples in the ummah today. And, you know, I think it's unfair. I'm sort of raising my head above, someone's going to shoot me now if I say this, but basically, you know, it's unfair that Muslim teenagers are unable to get married because of the social context and sort of the social norms in our communities, where there's a persistent emphasis on graduating and establishing yourself first. Absolutely, if you become the family man, then you ought to take financial responsibility. But where it's affordable for parents, isn't it better for your children to be in a halal relationship and you can feed an extra mouth for those few years more, rather than them falling into relationships which become a cause of them becoming very sinful? So this is something as a community we need to examine. And this doesn't mean, I said to the young people, that you don't appreciate the position of your parents. They also think for your welfare. When they want to guide you and advise you in terms of who you might get married to, it should be a bilateral relationship. You're the one who's going to get married, but see their position. You soften for them, they soften for you, and come to an agreement. So there's no doubt that this is an important subject, and talking about it isn't really the solution, is it? But I hope I've answered at least some aspects of your question. Islam wants something much bigger and better for you. When you choose someone as your soulmate, you go into the marriage with purity. Look, let me give you another element to this. And let me just finish on this point, because we need to come to the other questions. Supposing you do have lots of boyfriends or girlfriends, and then you go into a marriage, and then what happens? One of them rings you and your partner picks up the phone. Okay, so who's this? And I know of cases where marriages are broken down because of this. Are you going to be able to suddenly turn a new leaf, and to flip the coin the other way? And this is also, you know, we see examples of this in our society, where you go into a marriage and your partner has friends from previous relationships, quote unquote, and the phone rings and you discover something. What's that going to do to your marriage? So if you want someone to come into your marriage with no history, then you ought to go into their marriage with no history as well. Surely it's an equal playing field, isn't it? So there's so many elements to this. May Allah grant us tawfiq to understand. Ji.
If a relative passes away with debt to the bank, and after the death the bank has written off this debt, Islamically that amount that was due for the bank that we cannot pay now, is that still to be paid to charity or something?
Good question. If a person passes away and the bank writes off any debt they owed, should the permissible amount still be paid, or should it be given in charity? I'll have to come back to this question. I'd like to come back to it, inshallah. I'll come back to this question, inshallah. Certainly that you don't pay the interest, but if there's a part besides that, should it be given or not in charity on that person's behalf? Tentatively, I would say that there appears to be no obligation, because the person who owed it to whoever it was owed to, they've written it off. But I'll come back to this point, inshallah, in a future session.
The assumption would be the estate has been wound up.
Sorry?
The assumption would be that estate has been wound up, but
Mhm.
the questioner would need to clarify that.
Okay. Yeah, well, let's clarify the question and we'll come back to it, inshallah. Ji.
Is there any virtues in passing away in Ramadan or Jummah?
Are there any virtues in passing away in Ramadan or Jummah? Yes. There are some narrations which suggest that a person passes away on Jummah, they're not questioned in the grave. These are not substitutes for Iman or good amal. We need those, but they are a source of hope, because when Allah's rahmah, the moments in the day and year and week when there is a promise of extra mercy and rahmah, then the people who pass away also benefit from that. Ji.
Many ulama have said smoking is haram, and some have said it's makruh. Can you confirm?
Many ulama have said smoking is haram. Some say it's makruh. Can you clarify? Our issues have go beyond smoking now, don't they? Presumably, you're talking about tobacco.
Yeah.
Yes. So what about everything else that's smoked these days? If any young people are listening, please stop for your own sake. Smoking joints, smoking dope, sniffing, snorting, drinking, injecting, on and on and on. Okay, let us look at and examine the reasons why each have their position, and you can come to your conclusion. I mean, not in the sense that you can give a fatwa, but you can think about this. It's thought-provoking. Why is each giving their opinion? The ulama who say that smoking is makruh do so because of the smell. And many people do it. They say it's related to your blood type. Some people will smell more than others will, because it will be excreted through their sweat glands. Others will smell a little less, but it will certainly affect your breath. And so this is not desirable. And it's obviously a waste of money as well. So the smell is the reason for those who say it's makruh. This is a classical position. But as the research emerges, and more of it over recent decades, of the damage it does, the ulama that say it's haram say so on the basis that it's destructive to your health. And وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, don't kill yourselves, it's not permissible. The Quran says, and subhanAllah, of the few things you can buy on the shelf, a packet of cigarettes is one which says on the box, smoking kills, and you buy it. So this is the reason why ulama say it's haram. Why would you take something that may kill you? Ji. How are we doing for time?
10 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
One question. A young mother who has parental responsibilities
Mhm.
And can't devote much time to ibadah, is she at a loss compared to somebody who has
A woman who has parental responsibilities and can't devote a lot of time to ibadat, is she at a loss? No, as long as she's fulfilling her fard and doing as much as she can. So she should certainly squeeze out as much time as she can. But for parents of young children, there is an obligation towards those children. And this is a source of huge reward. So it shouldn't be used as an excuse. We need to perform our fard prayer and our sunan and nawafil need to be performed too, as much as this is possible. But where this isn't possible, it's difficult. You have to nurse somebody, you have to look after somebody. That too has its reward, and in many circumstances, the reward will be far in excess of the optional ibadah. And inshallah, your time will come. Children are not, my heart goes out to people in the lockdown who have very small children. You can see them being challenged, their sleeping patterns and working patterns, and there's quite quiet moments. People are desperately wishing that schools and nurseries were open, childcare. Understand that what you're doing is a source of reward, and it's not forever. And before you know it, the children will be older and more sensible. There'll be fresh challenges, yes, but you will certainly be able to perform your optional ibadah and worship, inshallah. So your time will come, inshallah. Ji.
Yeah, that's all we've got so far.
Okay. So alhamdulillah, Allah accept everything we said. There's a couple of points which we can come back to in a future session. Keep your questions coming, and we'll conclude for now. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه سيدنا محمد وآله